Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan Quickie article. And over the last couple of weeks here and there, we've kind of dropped in on how the idea guys have warped Chris's perception of reality. And among many manifestations that occurred was of one particular character known as CPU Blueheart. So, what is the story? Well, the CPU Blueheart is the goddess of the Commodore gaming consoles and computers. The original, Scarlet, had served a very long time, until when she had to pass on her powers and responsibilities onto Mama Chris Chan, who was the present CPU Blueheart, on top of her other responsibilities and duties. Now, now the point of all of this is that Chris lifted this and took inspiration from the video game series Hyperdimension Neptunia, which the idea guys exploited ad nauseum to create this new form of manifestations of goddesses all throughout Quickville. And as a result, Chris decided to take some lead from Commodore and make an entire character of her own based off the ideas of Hyperdimension Neptunia, which, for those who don't know, it's an entire series that's sort of devoted to manifestations of video gaming consoles and other accessories. It's an outrageously contrived, but it's quite a fun little series. But in fact, a fun little series in terms of how it spawned at least 25 video games in the last 10 years. So it's actually got a bit of a dedicated fan base, all right. Not helped by how Chris managed to hear of it. So, CPU Blueheart, also known as Scarlet Celestia, is the console patron unit, goddess of the nations of Quickville and Comma, and of the Commodore consoles. Conceived by Chris after being force-fed Hyperdimension Neptunia lore by the idea guys, Scarlet serves as one of his escapist alter egos, providing a coping mechanism and enabling his messiah complex. Through this alter ego, Chris has also emerged as the figurehead of the Dimensional Merge with his own group of worshippers. Who in their right mind would worship to Chris? That's the first question among many. The Idea Guys and Hyperdimension Neptunia. Prior to the Idea Guys, Chris's mental health was already in a fragile state. A contemporary highlight was when he attended BronyCon 2017 at the Grand Galloping Gala Ball. An attendant captured footage of Chris dancing by himself among the crowd. In his own retrospect, Chris remembers this ball for the passionate moment when he danced with his OC Magi-chan. Also at this time, Chris was sowing the seeds of his belief in other dimensions when he tweeted that life is a cartoon, because the universe being created by a higher power is akin to Cartoon Network creating their own franchises. In what was likely the first sign that Chris was being manipulated by the idea guys in early November of 2017, Chris posted a plea for prayers for the CPUs, as Quickville had been invaded by the villains of game industry. Filling in the blanks, Chris claimed he was briefly possessed by a representation of CPU Orange Heart Uzume Tenobushi, after laying his hands on his supercharged Sega Dreamcast. Now endowed with the abilities of a goddess, he traveled to his fantasy world to save the day. As you do. The following month, Chris introduced Battery Charge Heart, the CPU of Quickville and the Smash Z consoles. According to Chris, he devised the character to prayerfully end the war with Australantia and restore Quickville. But in his lore, the character proved to be a hindrance to the war. The reign of the idea guys would cease around April of 2018. However, the outlandish concept that instilled into Chris would lay the foundations for Sonichu issue 13, which would be completed that August. It is clear that Chris intended Battery Charge Heart to be his own Hyperdimension Neptunia CPU in the Sonichu franchise, but with his liberation from the idea guys, he would eventually push this character to the sidelines. The Awakening of a CPU. I had lived a long, tiring, and mentally and emotionally enduring life, made my own progress, recovery, and whatnot. Me, a half Sonichu invaded of this Earth 1218, destined to be a console patron unit. The epilogue to Sonichu issue 13. On the 14th of June 2018, Chris uploaded 2 videos requesting the help of a local technician to repair his Commodore 64, as a topic he rarely touches upon. Chris discussing computer hardware was somewhat out of the ordinary even for him. According to Solitude issue 13, which at this point in the series acts as a pseudo biography for him to chronicle his coping mechanisms, on the 16th of June 2018, which was a prophesized event, in which Chris received the soul and in turn the memories and abilities of Scarlet, upon touching his aforementioned Commodore 64. Furthermore, the prophecy elaborated that Scarlet's rebirth serves to oppose the return of Neptunia and Solitude 12-9 villain Ray Wrights, accompanied by a dreaded, fictitious Atari VCU console. For several weeks, Chris would remain vague about his newfound alter ego. I wish it continued that way, but it sadly wasn't to be. Nearly 2 weeks later, Chris unveiled Scarlet/CPU Blueheart, another OC based on Hyperdimension Neptunia. He followed up by posting screenshots of text messages between him and another person on Facebook, which detail notes of Scarlet. The following is an excerpt. Her name is Scarlet, aka Blueheart, and she ruled over the nation of Comma. It was a very prosperous nation, like the others of game industry. Then in 1992, like Tari, it fell, but instead of being lost, it crashed into an unoccupied area in northern West Virginia. Most, circa everyone, survived the impact. Then the citizens were in and out, free to see the rest of the US and take in other cultures and religions. But shares dropped for Scarlet and she passed on in 1994. But her soul and memories were sent into a Commodore 64 console in this world, waiting to be bestowed to the next Blueheart. I have heard that those memories have been bestowed recently to a woman who has owned that very same C64 console since the early 1980s. Despite being defunct since 1994, Chris went on in great detail to describe the next system for Commodore. Yeah, it was called the Amiga CD32. Can we move past that one, please? Which would be called the Commodore CW. In his correspondence, among other posts in July, Chris referred to an unnamed female who was the recipient of Scarlet's essence. In summary, Chris believed that the second coming of a fictional character of his own design would act in tandem with the return of a computer manufacturer which hasn't existed in decades. Finally, on the 3rd of August 2018, Chris announced on Twitter that he was the new CPU Blueheart candidate he previously alluded to. When he published the short prose, The Awakening of a CPU, aka The Idea Guy Corruptions, which would finalize his work on Sonichu 13 comic, I suppose on the mention of that, and my hubby, Magi-chan, told me what now was the time. I, Mrs. Christine Weston Chandler Sonichu, am the new CPU Blueheart. Moving forward, he urged his followers to spread the gospel of CPU Blueheart. Oh, CPU, the gospel of CPU Blueheart. What a game we're playing here, eh? As noted in his lore, Chris can transform into his CPU form as instantly as shouting access. He can also transform into a CPU version of his Chris-chan Sonichu persona when not body swapping with Sonichu or Magi-chan. Chris usually caps off his online posts with the emojis lightning, heart, lightning, representing his signature as CPU Blueheart. Much like the infamous unicorn cosplay, Chris has introduced another element currently dictating his life to his attire, this time his CPU status. For the duration of BronyCon 2019, Chris's cosplay included a metal Y on his forehead, contorted to resemble the Commodore logo. Back at home, Chris's engagement as CPU Blueheart has also drawn him closer to his interest in pseudoscience, with his use of magical tools such as wands and crystal-based devices to enhance his CPU abilities. Supposedly, not to break his immense role-playing, Chris was not stated why he chose the Commodore 64 when he has owned several gaming platforms in his lifetime. Though the C64 has been known to hold sentimental value for Chris, as it was his childhood computer and a hobby he bonded with his father over. The life of a CPU goddess. Chris Chan Solitude is watching over you. What Chris said to a woman going through a device. Yeah, probably the police, maybe. Since at least October 2018, Chris's main vocation as CPU Blueheart is to act as the overseer of the dimensional merge, in which our dimension 1218 will combine with dimension C197, the realm of most fictional franchises, which would bring the creations into our reality. Having stated that people would integrate with their fictional self-counterparts, Chris implies that he would have full reign of his goddess powers upon completion of the merge. On paper, it sounds like the draft for a Roger Rabbit-style blockbuster, but in actuality, Chris comes off as a bargain bin Harold Camping, with further comparison to the Evangelist. When the merge failed to occur on the 1st of January 2019, Chris simply recalculated his pending day of judgment. As of present day, the merge is yet to be manifested. In the early days of Chris's God Quest, he received a number of tributes in the form of artworks of his character, one of which was a drawing of a thick CPU Blueheart, which left him especially spiteful that day, declaring that Scarlet was not fat and he is not fat either. As the final nail in the coffin of finding employment, Chris started citing that his responsibilities as a goddess as sufficient reason for not needing a job. He has yet to use his divine powers to conjure up the six-figure summary that his family owes to various creditors, but he has assured a page back of tenfold once the merge has been completed. I am employed by Emmanuel, this world's god, the original CPU Blueheart of the Commodore's consoles, the chaotic rainbow that sent me to be born in this 1218 to find my guided paths. What qualifies me? I am very well motivated and mentally/emotionally/soulfully driven. I had and have awesome teachers and guides throughout my life who show me not only the basics but the metaphysical advanced due to my blessed born abilities and powers and then some. Yes, in the Gospel of CPU Blueheart and then some. In his attempts to persuade Hasbro to continue Friendship is Magic, he frequently invoked his CPU status. Notably, with the airing of the My Little Pony spin-off Pony Life, Chris, possessed by Solitude, used the CPU-appropriate blasphemy, "Oh my Chris Chan," to express his sheer disappointment with the show. When several members of the Brony analyst community blocked Chris over a short period of time, Chris created his current Twitter handle, CPU_QuickSolitude, in order to reconnect with his blockers and reduce Ween activity, effectively making his original account redundant. In a more bizarre coping mechanism, Chris created a self-insert Lego parody of one of his favorite Brony analysts, which features minifigure Chris assessing his CPU form. The Devotees of Chris Chan Solitude. In November of 2019, Chris steered a post on Christorians towards brainstorming his own religious following. He named his worshippers Devotees of Chris Chan Solitude, or DOCS, favored over the derivative but potential Quickenism as the name of his religion. Bottom line is, you all, my followers and worshippers, do have a choice to call your group as you will. Just Quickans, pronounced Quickens, and practicing Quickenism Okay, let's continue where we left off. It was around this time when Chris consecrated his home of 14 Branch Court, now bearing the title of the Temple of Christine Weston Chandler. But unfortunately for the goddess and avid Pokemon Go player, his place of worship was not hallowed enough to be accepted as a Pokestop. Chris's preference for the philosophic term devotee instead of worshipper stands in contrast to Chris' more overtly religious calls for his followers to have faith in all the OCs and all the deities, as in his video Believe in the OCs and Deities. As part of his new pet project, Chris commemorated his religious sect when he designed a set of Twilight Sparkle's secret shipfic photo cards based on his following, which included the Temple of Quix, aka 14 Branch Court, Quix, the gazebo, and the devotees of Chris Chan Sonichu, Sarah and Steve, um, Jacob Sockness, and I think Dylan Thomas and Tricky, to my knowledge. And finally, in the comics. In Chris's addendum to Sonichu 13, he explains that the destructive impact of the idea guys only strengthened his connection to the sister dimension, which in turn led to Chris fulfilling his prophecy of taking on the mantle of CPU Blueheart. In Sonichu issue 14, the introduction summarizes Chris's journey to becoming a CPU goddess, and he acquaints the reader with his role in the upcoming dimensional merge. Meanwhile, while working on construction of the Quickville Basilicom, Chris's share site is activated by an ally named Beth Stevenson, which is never addressed henceforth. So why even mention it? In Chris's dream, Chris and Magi-chan discover a room with a large round table, with a throne assigned to each deity slash CPU. Without Chris working on his comic books to publish further pages, the rest of the comic does not address anything of a CPU nature. So, despite dressing like a CPU, as he calls it, despite creating figurines and despite trying to do fan art, etc., Chris doesn't really seem to have bothered to have added anything whatsoever to actually making the comic slightly more interesting, outside of the fact that, once again, it's just a myriad of stolen ideas and stolen themes from much better properties. So you know it's got to be a thing for Sonichu when it's completely knocked off, unoriginal, and not even close to being true and honest. Bit of a harsh air of judgment, but, well, there you go. What do you want me to do? To lie to him? But with all that being said and done, I'll see all of you guys again next time. Thank you.